a lot of things have changed in the past. What was it, like 2020?
I think it was about 2020.
It was just in the beginning of, there were a couple of people sick, remember? And then,
You know what? It was actually 2019.
It was 2019?
It was because it was a Black Hat
Okay,
that
that's
we
right.
met.
That's right.
And then RSA rolled around. We met here, and then the whole world shut down.
yeah, exactly. And things have really, there's just, it's almost like all of a sudden it's like dog years. It's like everything is 7 years in 1 year.
Yeah, it definitely condensed everything from just our social behaviors to digital transformation. I mean, it kind of changed the whole world.
And Randy, everything is dynamic. Even the, like zero trust wasn't even a thing back 2 years ago, right? It's like all of a sudden like RSA is zero trust. And I've been asking people that have been doing this for like 20 years and they're coming back to RSA, why are we not getting better, after all this money investment into cybersecurity, and we still have, almost like trivial things that happen all the time. And then every once in a while you wake up in the morning and there's like this atom bomb just flew up, like a log for JLog for Shell, or like, SolarWinds. And then, the waves hit and everybody talks about it. And then there's a lot of ambulance chasers, especially on the vendor side. And then things kind of like die down and it's up to the next thing, the next shiny things.
Mm-hmm.
But you have done a phenomenal job growing Critical Start. So what's your secret in terms of what's your approach? And we talked about it when the cameras was off. And you mentioned kind of the number one, pillar for success is doing right by the customer. And is that your mantra, is Critical Start?
So we actually have 3 rules at Critical Start. Do what's right for the customer, do what's right for employees, and don't do things that suck. So whenever we kind of develop a new offering, whenever we're taking something to market, that's always a litmus test that we have to pass. You mentioned, why are we making all these investments, but we still seem to be no better off in security? It's because we're investing in the technology piece. And the technology piece is great and it's necessary, but it's one piece, right? We still need to have the people and the procedures as well. So what I'm seeing in the field is a lot of adoption of different technologies, a lot of cutting edge technologies, very necessary, very good technologies, but we don't have the expertise, the headcount to put behind it to say, okay, well, when this happens, what do I do? So we have these technologies that detect a thing or they prevent a thing, but we don't really have the people that know how to respond to those detections or configure those preventions. And that's really where a lot of the security controls that we try to put in place fall apart.
And that's why MSSPs are one of the fastest growing areas in cybersecurity from a service provider, because a lot of companies realize that they have to, shift away from something that's, very complex and it's not in the core competency, not in the core business, but they still need it to do business. How do you acquire new customers? Like in the sense that, Critical Start started as a fairly small firm, but you grew exponentially in the past several years. What's the process of acquiring new customers? Do customers come in because of an incident? Do they come in because of a problem they had? Did you solve them? Like, what's the kind of initial relationship? Because I think that one key aspect of signing up in an MSSP or any other firm for that matter is there's certain trust that needs to be there, right? Because you're not just buying a product, you're buying like an advisor, somebody who is almost an extension of you. So talk to me about that.
You're definitely buying an augmentation of your security team. And the trust piece that you mentioned is really important. And we do rely on our channel partners and our alliance partners to help establish some of that trust for us until our name is kind of big enough now to where it does have brand trust involved with it. So we do go to the market through the channel only, which means we work with security resellers and value-added resellers. We try to pick the ones that we feel add real value to their customers, not the ones that are just cramming boxes down people's throats.
So I would like to double click on that.
Okay.
What does that mean? And how do you do that? Because everybody, it's a real challenge, even for people that want to buy that technology in-house and want to deploy it in-house. It's such a noisy marketplace. I mean, if you walk down to RSA into the conference room, I mean, it's nuts, right? How do you you as a practitioner, how do you differentiate and decide, okay, I want to date this vendor and then potentially move in together? Like, how do you do that?
So when we're talking to our channel partners, the ones that are essentially working with the customers to qualify the opportunities to find out what's really keeping them awake at night and then present solutions, what we do is we brief them on our solution, and then we want to make sure they understand it. We want to make sure that they believe in our value prop, because our value prop is pretty unique. We're the only MDR provider that's resolving every single alert that gets generated by our alliance partners. So when we integrate with somebody like a Microsoft or a Palo Alto or any of those guys.
So when you say it's unique, what others do? They just ignore the alerts, or like how does that work?
There's two other models of getting through alerts. You can do priority oriented tuning, where you're looking at criticals, maybe you're looking at highs, but you never really get to the mediums and lows. Or you do input oriented tuning, where you're essentially turning off different speeds and feeds inside the products that are maybe a little bit more noisy.
So I can see problems with those two options.
Yeah, attackers live in the mediums and lows,
right.
and they're using a lot of login, so live off the land binaries. They're using administrative tools like PowerShell to do their attacks, and those are noisy because who else uses administrative tools? Administrators. So you have two options. Either one, you deal with this constant flood of alerts that comes from PowerShell and you try to struggle your way through it, or two, you turn off PowerShell alerts altogether.
So that noise to signal ratio is just a industry wide problem that no one has really any solutions for it.
It's that alert fatigue term that has been created and now is an industry standard term and almost an assumption inside of security.
And even with that said, all this promise of orchestration automation did not really pan out, and I think because of that signal to noise ratio, which is it's ever changes. So it's not like, okay, you tune a system to be just right, and then a week later and it's like it's all messed up because it's like no longer what we've seen from a behavioral or signature or whatever. Everything changes, and then all of a sudden there's like 0 days or things that never even existed before now an issue. So how does Critical Start what's your approach and how do you deal with that?
So first of all, the orchestration automation piece, there's a quote that I absolutely love, and if you apply automation to inefficiencies, you just magnify the inefficiencies.
Ooh, I like that.
And I think that was a Bill Gates quote.
Okay, so you don't trademark that.
Yeah, we can't trademark that one. But we kind of believe in that mantra. So when we built out our platform that we do the alert resolution, and we call it our Zero Trust Analytics platform. You mentioned Zero Trust. Well, we're on that bandwagon too. We kind of stepped away from the concept of incidents and really broke it down into the building blocks that make an incident. And we figured if we can resolve each one of these building blocks, it's less work, there's less steps, and if we can resolve all of them, then there is no incident to be had. And then we did it with a kind of a positive security model. And instead of trying to bubble up a bad, we just said, if it's not good, if it's not known good, if we don't expect this to happen, it's bad. So what we're doing is we're looking at very specific conditions of alerts that are generated to say, no, this is accepted behavior. So an example, Dropbox.exe, right? It's unsigned and it makes network connections all day. Well, what else is an unsigned binary that makes network connections? Every rat, every Trojan, every piece of ransomware, every dropper. So we would create a condition inside of our platform that says, well, if it's Dropbox.exe and it's running from C program files Dropbox and it's running, with this hash that we can validate belongs to Dropbox and it's connecting to IP addresses that we can validate belong to Dropbox. This is expected behavior. Don't show this to my analyst. Mm-hmm. Right now, if anybody injects into Dropbox or if somebody changes the host file and starts sending it to different IP addresses, that's going to fire off a new alert and that goes to our analysts. So we've been able to build out these playbooks that are kind of globally applicable to resolve these alerts that we see very commonly across all of our customers. And that allows us to focus on things like PowerShell that are unique to the customer. So now when we see PowerShell run and it generates an alert, we can validate that this is not malicious behavior, it's benign behavior, it's a known administrator that's running from their machine during a certain time of day, they're already validated and credentialed in, and this is within the scope of expected behavior. If anything changes, if any of these conditions are different, then it's a net new alert that again has to be triaged by an analyst.
And what's the process? How long does it take to kind of hone in on that particular customer environment? Because everyone has different tools, and I'm assuming again that's something you as a service provider have to really figure out. And talk to me about that transition from, do they turn a dial a little bit and then let you take ownership over a little bit more and more, or is it just one day it is cut off and then Critical Start is it?
Well, so we run based on two concepts. The first is every alert that can be generated must be generated. So when we onboard a customer, we start off by configuring their product to that product manufacturer's best practices. So we turn everything on.
So all of a sudden it's almost like they see the light, because I'm pretty sure that they've turned all of it off, or at least a very large fraction, because they don't have the people power to maintain it, right?
You're exactly right. It is
like to turn on the blinds, all of a sudden they get like, do they say anything do you provide those reports right away, or is it something that they see after the fact?
Most of our customers see a substantial increase in visibility. Yeah. Once we get those alerts generated, we operate like the American justice system, but the exact opposite. So every alert is guilty until proven innocent. And that whole process of building out the trusted behavior registry, those globally applicable playbooks for things like Dropbox or Firefox or Chrome or Adobe or Microsoft Office, those are applicable right out of the gate. And we find that about 90% of the alerts are generated are kind of known good across all customers. The remaining 10%, we can usually get through those in the next 2 to 4 weeks. Maybe there's different processes at month end, quarter end, year end that we have to capture. But by and large, most of our customers are fully implemented in production monitoring in that 2 to 4 week time frame.
And how do they know that you're successful? Like, in terms of what is a criteria for success? Is it just strictly reviewing all these alerts and providing the insight that you've kind of dealt with it, or like how do they know that you're really doing what you're supposed to be doing?
So last year we had a very strategic initiative inside the company to be the best at proving value. Because
interesting.
It's an interesting concept, although it doesn't seem like it should be. It seems like everybody should be focused on how do we prove that we do what we say we do.
We talked about it, and I don't know if you want to spill all the beans right now. Like, maybe some other vendors or service providers would like say, hey, that makes total sense. We should probably do this, something like that.
Well, I mean, it would be for the better of security, and we feel like we're already doing it pretty well. So I don't have any reservations about sharing. We do have a number of different reports that we provide to the customer, but they also get an assigned customer success manager. And that CSM is doing biweekly, weekly, monthly reviews based on customer needs to go through, hey, this is the work that we've done for you. We resolved this many alerts. We escalated these things to you. We isolated these hosts. We disabled these user accounts, revoked these session tokens. We've stopped these different attacks. So we do a considerable amount of work around proving that we're providing the value that we say we're providing, proving that we're resolving every alert and within our contractual SLAs. And all of that is transparent inside of our platform. So one of the bigger pieces that we did from the very beginning was made sure that our customers could see literally everything our analysts could see, with the only exception being customers see their data, our analysts see all customer data. So there's nothing that our analysts are looking at. There's no reports that we have that the customer doesn't have full access to. And that's that whole unique concept of trust but verify.
And is there any friction associated with that, in terms of customers maybe, getting, things that they did not expect to see, or they're impatient in terms of some results, or because I'm sure, like, just listen, you deal with something that's very complex, and frankly the customers may not have the expertise you have, and that's why they hired you, but they think they do. That's the dichotomy between, talk to me about the some, and without naming names or providing the insight, I'm sure it wasn't all roses, so tell me about areas where you had to deal with some customers that maybe did not, see the value or did not expect what you provided. Do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, security, unfortunately, is one of those jobs where nobody calls you when you're doing good at it. So you're never going to get a call at the end of the day where your boss just says, like, hey, thanks for keeping us secure. If nothing happens in security, it's a good day. So we do have a few customers where we have to do continuous education, continuous expectation setting around, like, hey, we didn't escalate it. You didn't send us any alerts because there was nothing of interest. Like, luckily nothing happened. And once we get to the point where we're kind of automatically resolving a lot of these alerts because we understand how that organization operates, there may not be an escalation every day. There may not be an escalation every week. We're only escalating the things that are net new or malicious.
So it's funny today. It's almost, they get scared with saying, like, it's like, what's going on? It's like nothing happening.
And our recourse for that was to set up those consistent, regularly scheduled meetings with the customer success managers to show them, no, we're still working. We're still resolving all these alerts. We had 10,000 alerts come in last month. We resolved every single one of them. There was nothing malicious. We escalated these ones. You replied back. We built these into the trusted behavior registry. We created these playbooks for you. So it's a constant battle of you don't want to report anything to the customer because reporting things usually means there's an incident that we had to stop, but you do have to show them what they're getting for their money, and also show them what they would get if they weren't using your service. So your people would be resolving these alerts, and there's 10,000 alerts that came in with an average time of 30 minutes to investigate and respond to an alert. How long would it have taken you to get through those? How long would it have taken you to catch that breach if it was the 9,999th alert? Right? You never would have got to it. And that's why we routinely see dwell times in the 200 plus days, according to Ponemon studies and IBM cost of a breach studies.
Which is an incredible amount of time. It's like, it really is, when you think about how much time, the adversaries were, in your network for that long. It's crazy. They probably know your network better than you do.
That's a running joke. It's like, man, if I wanted a network topology, I would just ask this nation state for it.
Yeah, they probably have the whole map thing. And is there a time where you said, okay, I'm getting more successful now? It's the 80-20 rule. I probably made 80% of my revenue coming from 20% of my customer. Is there any time where you say, well, I'm fed up. I'm going to fire this customer. I'm going to let them, go with my competitor? Or is it not happening? Not yet.
We've had a couple of incidents where the customer was not maybe a good fit for Critical Start, not because our service didn't operate correctly, but there were a few instances where customers were maybe a little bit abusive towards analysts that were, kind of divulging things that the customer didn't like, right? Nobody likes to have their baby called ugly. So when we show you, hey, this is how the breach happened, sometimes tempers take over, and we have had to kind of resolve that in specific ways, but we've never had a customer that was so demanding that we couldn't meet them. And actually, that's one of the big reasons we built the service the way we did. When we started the business, we thought it was going to be a lot of SMB. We figured we were going to play in the 300 to 500 user space.
I remember that.
And then we got a customer that was 1,000 users, and we found out they had the same problem. Then it was 5,000 users, and they had the same problem. Then it was 20,000 users, and they had the same problem. We realized that this is it's the same problem at scale. So no matter how large or small the enterprise, a lot of times they're understaffed. Even if they do have 5, 10, 15 people on the security team, it's not keeping up with the 20, 30,000 users that those 15 people are responsible for monitoring. So when we deal with these larger, more complex environments, we had to build the service in a way that was agile enough to adapt to their business process, because the last thing you want to do is take a large complex enterprise and try and shove it into your box or your idea of what their service should be. So it really did take a lot of purposeful design in the platform and the service to make sure we were able to adapt to the customer's business as opposed to the other way around. And that's where that kind of local trusted behavior registry, that specific registry for just that customer, came into play, because we recognized we needed to capture business process for individual customers, and that doesn't globally apply everywhere.
Yeah, but it does generate these economies of scales where when you see an issue, you probably like on top of things, because you start seeing trends in certain areas of like networking or vulnerabilities, and immediately the rest of the customers are starting to benefit from that, because again, it's one thing to have working in a very siloed approach where you only have your network, but now you're dealing with what's the total kind of like exposure size of the customers, the number of customers, let's say just total number of endpoints you guys are responsible for.
I'll ballpark and say over 1.5 million.
That's a critical mass right there. So do you see trends or certain type of attacks, for example, that no one else sees? Do you and how do you react to that when you see something like that? How do you, again, it's noise to signal ratio, how do you know that it's not a single case, and then all of a sudden you see there's 10 other customers are about to get hit?
Well, it's kind of the opposite of that, right? Because we're not looking for the bad. We're just identifying what's expected and known good and throwing it away, saying this is safe. We can automatically resolve this, and what's left over needs to be investigated. So a lot of the attacks we find, they weren't actually detected as attacks. It was just detected as an activity, but we identified it as not expected activity, and it turned into something that was more. So a lot of these attacks we're catching very, very early on. A good example is ransomware. We're starting to see that be more interactive as opposed to automated. So when ransomware first came out and started hitting enterprises, it was an automated worm. It crawled through the network. It was extremely noisy, very easy to pick up. Now what we're seeing is the attacker will gain access through a phishing email, stolen credentials, something like that. They'll capture additional credentials. They'll move laterally. They'll find what they want. They'll exfiltrate data. And really, the ransomware is a parting gift.
Almost like a white glove service.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's hands-on ransomware.
Why is that? Is it because the automation failed or what?
Well, it's because it's too easy to pick up automated ransomware. So they said, well, we'll just put that in at the very end, and we'll run our attack interactively up until that point. And what that allows us to do, it gives us more time to identify that attacker. So the second they hit a box and they, try to find out where they're at in the network, or they try to see who else is logged into that computer, they try to steal some credentials, it immediately fires off an alert that may not be something malicious in and of itself, but to us it's not known good, and we investigate that and go, oh, wait a minute, there's something here. And we've actually done responses before where we would have seen the attacker 30 days before they actually launched the ransomware. They were in that network crawling around. Absolutely.
It's almost like a Minority Report, but they're going to be hacking before they do.
Exactly. Well, you see their activity. They have no idea that you're seeing it because they're living in those medium and low alerts that they know most security organizations can't triage. So we do see a lot of very unique attacks from that perspective. We are able to identify campaigns across multiple customers or in a specific vertical.
Can you recognize a certain, almost like a activity that is associated with this particular group because that uses similar type of techniques? Almost like I have a signature activities they do. Can you tell who's doing what?
We can usually do some level of attribution. And that's where kind of the other part of Critical Start comes in. So we do have a threat intelligence team. They're gathering signal from our incident response team. They're gathering signal from our SOC. They're gathering signal from other threat intel providers, aggregating those together. And then they're actually operationalizing the threat intelligence by passing those reports over to our detection engineering team and our resolution engineering team. And what they're responsible for doing is tearing apart all of those kind of fingerprints and saying, if we put this detection into the products, it would detect it earlier, it would detect it better, more reliably. And if we see this, this is how we would respond to it. And that's where you start to get better detection, more effective detection of attacks based on the visibility that we have across all of the endpoints that we're monitoring.
So do you close the loops with all those vendors that you work with? There's, channel partners that you provide in a feedback loop, or would you at some point in time say, okay, I know what I'm doing, I'm very good at this, maybe I don't have to rely on like third-party channels, maybe I should do it on my own? Because there's some MSSPs that have decided to basically create their own tools.
Yeah, there's a lot of MSSPs that are essentially ripping the raw telemetry out of the products, and then they're doing their own detections. But all of the products we support, they spent billions of dollars developing detection products. So if we come out with a new detection, we want to detect a new TTP that we're seeing, we'll write the detection for each one of the different products we support. We support about 10 products, actually 11, with our latest announcement being support for Trend Micro. We will write signatures for all the different products, and then we use our own internal product that we developed called Threat Navigator to not only map it to MITRE, but then to distribute that detection across all the products for all of our customers.
It sounds like a lot. It sounds like 11 products. Like, how do you maintain that expertise on 11 various products that have their own updates, it's just, how do you take care of that?
Very carefully. We have a fantastic product team. We do have product managers for each one of our Alliance products, and they're responsible for keeping up to date with any API changes, but also keeping up to date with any new capabilities inside of that product. We want to be able to leverage all of the capabilities of our different Alliance partners.
Did you ever have to sunset a product that wasn't on par or something that happened? Because again, leading in a certain category may not be leader tomorrow. Things are really dynamic that way,
The only reason we would sunset a product, and there have been a couple that we have refused to launch, they just did not have the capabilities that we deem necessary to deliver the service at the quality we require. So they didn't have certain APIs, they didn't deliver certain key value pairs, they weren't able to detect certain movements or maybe certain memory attacks. And we thought that left the customer too vulnerable to exposure, even with our service tacked on top of it. So we actually try to identify that in the diligence phase before we start writing code.
And do you ever have like almost like a hybrid model where you recommend customers a certain products and they deploy it, and then they only come to you when in need, or is it strictly you manage it for them?
So we work very closely with our channel partners, and a lot of times they're being very prescriptive and very consultative around what products would work better or worse inside of a customer environment. Occasionally they'll bring us in to get our opinion based on our capabilities to monitor on different products. It's fairly consistent across the products. Most of them have about the same capabilities. Most of them have host isolation capabilities. We can pull back parent process and grandparent process and command line. So we're fairly consistent with our ability to provide service across the products that we're still integrated with. But occasionally they do call us in and the customer wants an unbiased third party and says, hey, what would you recommend given this, this, and this? And then we'll make our recommendation, and then it's up to them to move forward with it.
And so some MSPs have a resell arm where they say, okay, we don't want to leave money on the table. We know the customers, we have the expertise, we have the cloud. And sometimes the customer would never get a managed service, but they only wanted to buy off the shelf. And then are you purely an MSSP play, or do you ever resell?
We do not resell. We leverage our channel partners for that. So going back to do what's right for the customer, a lot of times customers have relationships with value-added resellers that they know, they've worked with in the past. That reseller is providing them a ton of value, and they want to continue to buy through that reseller. We're just a service provider. So the way it works is the channel partner will sell the product that we're going to monitor, and then they'll just put our monitoring rate on top. We work with those channel partners very closely. We will not resell product.
Okay. And what do you see like the kind of next iteration for Critical Start? I mean, you guys are doing well, obviously. How do you exponentially grow from here? Because there's always this this time where a company hits a wall, from maybe a customer acquisition perspective, maybe getting the right personnel to join the company. Also, market conditions change. What's your vision for the company? Like, where do you go next?
Well, luckily market conditions are changing, but they're favorable for us. Right. I mean, even Microsoft said that by 2025, more than half of enterprises are going to have to use managed detection and response.
That is crazy. That's like half. I mean, that's the numbers are intense. Like because what does that mean from a there's not enough MSSPs right now as we speak to
Correct.
Cover for half.
Yeah, I mean, because you're talking maybe 5% using MDRs and MSSPs today. So
Correct.
There's going to be a huge amount of growth. One of the things that we've really kind of taken on as an initiative this year is to grow our brand recognition. That goes a lot into marketing. On the product side, it's support more products, right? We do have a couple of products that we want to bake in support. We're getting a lot of requests from our channel partners, from our customers. We also want to start moving into some, I guess you could call them posture management style services. So looking a little bit left of bang, if I'm going to use a cliche term. But we definitely have some plans for expansion. We also very excited to have Vista Equity on board. They led our Series B. They bring to bear a lot of resources, both in terms of personnel, expertise, and also playbooks. I mean, they're the world's largest software security investor. So when they came in, they looked at everything from our technology to our roadmap to our processes. And the list of recommendations they came back with were all stellar, phenomenal. They know how to execute on them. So really looking forward to the next 12, 24 months to see what happens once we actually start to put, rubber to the road and implement some of those changes.
Do you ever, concerned it's beware for what you wish for? Like that you're going to wake up one day, you're going to have all those customers you can't handle?
Nope. We're fairly comfortable with our ability to scale. That was one thing that we addressed very early on because MSSP and MDR historically was thought of as a headcount problem. Throw bodies at it. We recognized that didn't work, but we also recognized that we needed to have a higher quality of body that we could put there. So our ability to attract and retain talent is something that we put a lot of purposeful effort into. Everything from our analyst training course, which is 8 weeks before they ever touch customer data, to career progression. So they can go from a tier 1 to a tier 2. And then from tier 2, they can go to a tier 3. They can go into customer success. They can go into implementation engineering. They can go into customer support. They can go into incident response. I mean, there's a lot of lateral movement. So we've really put a lot of effort into making sure our practices are very sound and stable for attracting the talent, hiring the talent, training the talent, and retaining them. So when it comes to scale, I mean, if we wake up tomorrow and there's way too many customers for us to handle, give us a week and we'll be on top of it. It'll be a good problem.
And what you just mentioned is ultimately good for the customer. Because they even an analyst will create a personal relationship with the customer. And it's not a good thing to have. Like you call in and like a year later somebody else. It's like it's and I've seen that happen before. What's your take about like the AI assistant technologies out there for specifically around SOC management and allowing analysts to review more efficiently those the results, or what's your take on those AI assistant technologies?
There's some very good use cases for AI inside of security. I think when it comes to detections, it's an absolute no-brainer. Although I will say a lot of people confuse AI with statistics. So, I mean, we have to kind of draw delineations there.
Yeah, people are saying it, and it's not my saying. It's like there's no AI. There's AAI. Artificial intelligence, because a lot of it is just machine learning with bottom line is just a regular standard deviation.
Exactly.
That's all it is really. But they make marketing is all over it.
Yep. Yeah. And absolutely necessary for detecting more things. Right. The correlation that we're able to do now across disparate data sets is very impressive. The ability for ML to somewhat tune itself based on outliers or based on human classification after the fact is getting better. There's places for it to be applied. Unfortunately, when it comes to replacing the analyst, so to speak, I think there's an element of human logic, an element of almost curiosity and determination that you can't bake into AI that really takes an analyst to dive into an event to the point where they do discover that it is malicious. And we have a number of examples where a standard detection with some automation on top of it would have completely flown under the radar, but it was one persistent analyst pulling at a string that eventually unraveled a much larger attack. So I believe in AI, believe in ML. I'm not naysaying any of that stuff. I think there's a time and place for it, and I think detection is very, very detection benefits very much from AI and ML. Replacing the analyst, I have my reservations.
So that means that the last analyst is still around. It's still been born. It's not like we still need those in the years to come. They may be like more as the skill set maybe not necessarily have to be completely there. You can have a lot of assistance, and I think they do that today for a lot of areas like healthcare and even mechanics and so on. There's a lot of AI assistants out there. So from a technology perspective, you spend a couple of days at RSA. Any particular areas of technology areas that you're seeing as kind of the next iteration of security? That's something that you can tell that it's like exciting, or is it all more of the same?
Man, it's a lot of the same. Authentication's still a big deal. I see a lot of passwordless stuff out there. Identity. And identity is the new perimeter. I've heard it a million times, and I kind of believe it.
How long has identity's been around?
Exactly. But now with kind of the network perimeter dissolving, a lot of people moving into SaaS, mostly remote workers now thanks to COVID. Identity is becoming the perimeter. We did release a solution around identity, leveraging Microsoft very heavily for that. I see a lot of solutions like that on the floor. I also see a lot of posture.
Maybe talk to me about that particular solution, just for people that they don't know. You mentioned you just released something new.
Yeah, so Microsoft has a very large suite of security products. So they have Microsoft Defender for Identity, Defender for Office, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Endpoint. They actually do a really good job of detecting. Microsoft has been a top investor in security for the last 5 years running, and they got a lot to show for it. So I mean, they always show up in the top right in Gartner, and I think it's for good reason. So what we did is we actually wrapped our service around Microsoft Defender for Identity, leveraging Azure Sentinel, along with some of the other telemetry they gather, to be able to detect malicious or suspicious user behavior and then actually respond to it as well. So once we were able to tap that identity space, we were able to do things like reset user passwords, disable user accounts, revoke session tokens. So the identity, once you do the detection, you still have to do the response. And luckily, that's becoming kind of an easier capability. So we do integrate with the entirety of the Microsoft security stack, and we can provide kind of detection and response services around identity through Microsoft.
And when people come to you, they say, hold on, this company is going to take over my job or my team's job. Is that a bit of something you come across? Like?
All the time, especially because we talk to large enterprise, right? So they might have a SOC of 2 or 3 people, and they're like, well, you're just trying to replace me? No. We're trying to elevate you, because you can have an MDR provider and still need internal security. Guaranteed you're going to need internal security. But what you don't need is your expensive resources at the customer site doing tier 1 and 2 triage on alerts that a third party can do more efficiently. And this kind of goes back to the AI conversation and presenting more data to the analyst. We can be more efficient because we're collecting more data from more customers, and we're centralizing it into one location where our expert analyst can look at it. So when we go into a customer that has an existing security team, what we're talking about is not replacement, it is augmentation. And it's elevating those resources that they have. So now, instead of being a tier 1 or 2 analyst, you're our boots on ground. You're our tier 3, you're our tier 4, you're a threat hunter, you're an incident responder. Or you can migrate to something else inside the organization, like setting up the identity and access management, doing the vulnerability management and patching, things that you probably shouldn't outsource.
Yeah, and you just make their job more interesting. You know, leave the mundane to you, and then let them deal with the cool stuff. I think that should be like the mantra right there.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, analyst burnout is a real thing, and I mean, my favorite statistic in the entire company is the fact that we have over a 90% analyst retention rating over the last 5 years.
It's incredible.
It's crazy.
What's the industry average? Do you know?
I don't know, 40. Yeah. I mean, I think the average tenure for an analyst is about 8 months. And we have guys on our team that, like our first analyst, still here. He's a tier 4 now. He's a leader inside of the SOC. But we do a great job of keeping our talent. And one of those reasons is because once we are able to automatically resolve that known good behavior, the analyst will never see it again. The customer will never see it again. We're safely resolving that. We know it's expected. So like you said, we're doing that quote unquote mundane work. For our analysts, it's not mundane because they're not looking at the same alerts. But for organizations that don't have an MDR or an MSSP that's doing the tier 1 and 2, you can expect a lot of turnover in that position. And unfortunately, you're going to put a little bit of resources into that role to train them and bring them up to speed. So you're constantly going to be playing this learning curve and retraining game, and really not coming out any better for it.
And how do the customers price it out? So let's say you mentioned they have 2 or 3 analysts and staff, but now they're thinking, okay, like, how do we get more? Or we get get a critical start to start taking ownership of some areas that we need some help or fill the gaps. How do you price it out in such a way that they're, it's evident for them that they're getting the value. It's all about the value, but it's also within their budget, so they don't necessarily have to potentially let somebody go, and then augment all of that, as a SaaS model or like a service provider model where you pay annually. It's always come up for renewal, right? So that you have to show the value. How do you price it out in such a way that makes sense?
Well, I'll say that we've never sold into a customer that immediately fired somebody afterwards to compensate. So anytime we go into a customer, I guess when we first started, we were doing a lot of evangelization. Hey, this is what it is. You have these risks. You're not resolving these risks. So really, you're accepting risk on behalf of your organization because you don't feel there's an alternative. But when we're kind of justifying the price, it's fairly straightforward, and most customers understand that these are risks that they can no longer afford to accept, and the C-suite is driving that, right? The C-suite is becoming more knowledgeable because they're being forced to. I mean, there's routinely breaches in the news, and they're asking their security teams, how is that not us tomorrow? And they say, well, we're not able to resolve all these alerts. We have the right tools in place, but we're not able to really utilize them. So most of the time nowadays when customers come to us, they understand there's a cost associated with it, but they've already kind of decided that that cost is necessary. If they haven't, and it's a pretty straightforward pricing, we follow our alliance partners. So if somebody charges based on ingest for a SIM, that's how we charge. If somebody charges based on endpoint, that's how we charge. Our service directly aligns with how they go to market as well. So everything is pretty kind of copacetic and cohesive going into the customer's environment. And if we have to justify the cost by doing a risk analysis, we do that. We obviously have our own ROI calculators, as everybody does. So there's a couple of different ways we justify it, but I'm happy to say there's not been a scenario where a CISO has come to us and said, hey, I need to buy an MDR so I can replace my security team.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because, again, it's one of the biggest fear for some of these companies that they have to do, or the people that are involved, that they're potentially going to lose their jobs, but it's not really the case. It's just and I think there's always something they need to do, and just you allocate those resources to do things that they couldn't have done before, because a lot of companies just put out fires all day. They neglect the regular day-to-day things that they need to do to maintain the network and the endpoints and so on.
Well, that's exactly what we talked about at the beginning, right? I mean, why are we investing all this money in technology and security is not really getting any better? Well, it's because we don't have the people to manage it, because we're making them do tier 1 and 2 stuff. So, I mean, I've been on the customer side before, and we were in this endless cycle of, hey, I'm going to implement a product, then I'm going to implement the next product, then I'm going to implement the next product. And yeah, I wrote procedures to operationalize it, but who's actually operationalizing it? Who's looking at the data? Who's looking at the alerts that are coming out? It was no one. I was always on to the next product to implement because that was the direction. There was never anybody to go back and actually look at what was coming out of those products that we were implementing. So being able to free up your resources that are now currently tier 1 and 2, and reassign them, reallocate them to something that's more meaningful to the company while a third party does the tier 1 and 2, it's kind of the necessary way to expand security and increase security posture.
And everybody talking about getting the next product, it's all about the hype cycle, right? That chart. Are MSSPs immune to that, or is it something that you see as well, or do you ride that wave and say, okay, as customers come to you and say, we want this, can you manage this for us, or is it you're because you do a service, you're not as affected?
There's definitely a wave. There's definitely some momentum. I mean, momentum has been creeping up quite a bit now with Forrester, Gartner, the major analyst communities looking at MDR players. But I do think it is a foundational technology, or a foundational service. I'm not just saying that because we offer it. I'm saying it because technology, people, procedure, you have to have all three. And the people problem is not shrinking, right? It's only getting worse. So I do think there's a necessary place for MDRs and MSSPs that should be immune to a hype cycle. But just like we have budget cycles, I mean, it's always going to have its ebbs and flows, but it's continuously returning back to the fact that customers don't have people. So even if they turn away from it and they say, well, we're going to put a SOAR in place. Well, then they realize that if you try to replace your analysts with a SOAR, you have to put engineers in charge of that SOAR. So you didn't really save anything. You just shifted where your headcount was. Well, wouldn't you rather do that but actually get additional headcount? And that's what they get with an MDR. They're getting the people and the technology and the procedure all wrapped up in one, and that's really what the customer wants is outcomes. They're not trying to buy more things. I always liken it to washing a car. I can give you the soap, I can give you the buckets, I can give you the sponge and the pressure washer, but if you're gone the entire week and the car needs to be washed on Friday, what are you doing? You don't have the time to do it. So you can buy all the technology you want, you can put it in place, you can write the procedures, but until you have people to actually follow those procedures, it doesn't matter.
And it's always the case. We've seen, and I've been to customer sites where, I asked, what is that? Because I see boxes in the hallway. And they go, well, we bought this 8 months ago. And it's still there.
Shelfware.
Yeah, shelfware.
They got the compliance checkbox, though.
And it's real, especially when it was the end of the quarter or something, and they had to buy and they got a discount. Let me ask you this. IDT, the ADT, sorry, the physical security company. I think there's some insurance company that if you have that service, and you know where I'm going with this. If you have the service, maybe you get a break on the premium. Is there such thing where okay, I have critical start on my side? Would my premium go down if I want to do cyber insurance?
So Man, there's a lot to unpack with cyber insurance, and I've done multiple podcasts on just cyber insurance.
I open up the Pandora box right here.
So I'll try to be very, very, very high level. We're working with some insurance providers. We're working with some insurance companies, but I don't think it's going to be a discount. I think it's going to be a requirement. A lot of these, I mean, look at two-factor authentication.
Statement right there.
We'll look at two-factor authentication from 3 years ago. It was, hey, you should probably have this if you want cyber insurance. Now you're not getting cyber insurance unless you have it. I think that's going to be the future for 24/7 monitoring. And since most organizations can't afford true 24/7 monitoring,
there's no way. It's just too costly.
Exactly.
So it's going to be a mandated. It's almost like, okay, it's like a seatbelt. In order for you to have that car, you have to have the seatbelt. You're not talking about the car example.
That's what I'm thinking. We'll see how that pans out.
So if that happens, there's not going to be enough critical starts out there to cover, because everyone who does business will have to eventually have a 24/7 monitoring, which they can't afford. They'll have to go out to a service provider and get that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll try to scale as best we can to help the market. It is interesting though, the entire insurance space. It seems like more security initiatives are being driven by the cost of their insurance premium than have ever been driven by compliance or breach. Because now it's a mandatory cost. Yeah. So compliance only hurts after you're out of compliance, right? And a breach only hurts after you get breached. But an insurance premium, you're going to pay that. You have to pay that. So it's something that you can't avoid the consequence of a very, very high premium.
And insurance companies became smarter, because it was like, I think that last year was very bad for the insurance company's perspective, and they're not pro bono, right? So They're not, it's insurance.com, not .org.
Right.
So they're there to make money, and if they're not making money and they're losing money, then something's wrong, and they're going to up the premiums until they start making money, and that offset to the cost of the customers. And we've seen some, I think the last really big one was the Merck one, where they won $1.3 billion in settlement, which I think is probably going to be in court for the next 10 years.
Oh yeah.
But that really shook the industry, the insurance industry, because now they're saying, okay, do we want to be in that business? And I think now, even for cyber insurance, there's certain providers will just say no to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you don't meet their minimum requirements. Now the requirements are insane. And the thing too is, how do you ensure that? How do you know if it's going to be a $1 million breach or a $1 billion breach? It's wild. It just depends on what gets compromised, who gets leveraged. And now in the environment of ransomware, now there's ransomware riders, right? Or it's getting written out of the policy. Third party software, things like SolarWinds might not be covered. If your third party vendor gets breached and you get breached as a byproduct, well, who's actually liable for that? There's a whole conversation around liabilities that needs to be had, but I don't think anybody really understands how to wrap their hands around it. So it's a very interesting dynamic that the insurance industry is making. I'm not sure how that problem gets solved. I know there's a lot of security experts working on it. I know they've released a lot of guidance around security controls. I actually think that the insurance companies will almost take the place of compliance boards in terms of driving security initiatives, just because, like I said, that insurance premium is unavoidable.
Yeah, and speaking of compliance, we see like increasing compliance requirements all over across the board. So it started with like a CMMC. Trickles down to the rest of the government, and now all of that is going to go down to the private sector as well. So there's really no escape from that. Are you planning to have some play in that as well, just to maybe help companies be more compliant in certain areas, just because they outsource the service? Because it's more than just a check mark saying we're compliant. There's certain areas where you have to do, like you mentioned, monitoring. Is there a play there for Critical Start to ride kind of the compliance wave?
For now, there's only a play as far as threat detection and response as a requirement. We're not going into the GRC space. We're not trying to assist customers in getting their ROC or getting whatever certifications they need. But as far as 24/7 monitoring or resolution of alerts or proper maintenance of security solutions is concerned, we obviously play a role in that. And we do kind of market towards that, but then we also provide the kind of evidence that's necessary to pass your compliance. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to be doing direct assessments anytime soon, but we definitely do serve a function inside of compliance.
And if you could, choose the perfect, poster child customer, what would that look like from maybe just not maybe culture, but also like the environment? What does that look like for you, that you could say, okay, that customer is perfect for us. They have all the ducks in a row to onboard, Critical Start and start working with us.
So,
and then maybe the flip side, it was the nightmare customer saying, hey, that customer will take us forever to onboard, and we know we're going to have issues.
So the ideal customer for us is typically they have a security team that recognizes they're understaffed. They're extremely sharp. They have their product deployed, but they know they can't manage the alerts that are coming out of it.
It's almost an oxymoron, no? A little bit.
It is. I mean,
it's like the one side they're like super competent and sharp, and then which lends itself to being hands-on and saying, okay, I can do it. I can do all of it. And then the other side is like, okay, well, let you handle some of my work that I have to do.
But those are the smartest people, the people that realize they know how to do it. Our customers know how to do it. They could do it. They just don't have the headcount for it. So those customers that realize, hey, we know what we're doing, but we just don't have the manpower for it, and the other parts of the organization are suffering because of that. That realization, once that clicks for some customers, those make the best customers for us, because they're usually much more willing to partner. They see us as a partner, as a true augmentation. The ones that are nightmare customers do see us as a replacement for their security team. They see us as a just kind of a necessary evil, and it becomes more about proving they could do it better, rather than partnering up with us to deliver solid security for their environment. Luckily, we don't get too many of those.
And do some people, some customers have you on a speed dial, or are dreading, because as a CTO, like if you're getting the call, something is up. So they see your number and they shudder, because they know it's like a really big deal, because Randy's calling me and they're dealing with all my security. Is there dynamics like that?
So there kind of is. They
always accept your call for sure.
Well, so I always accept my customers' calls, and most of the times they accept my call, because I don't reach out a lot of times to say, hey, there's something wrong. That's the SOC. Right. Right. So if I reach out, it's usually trying to get feedback, trying to see how things are going, or just checking in on them. Customers that reach out to me, it's generally to provide some level of feedback on the service. They also have a customer success manager that they reach out directly to. And if there is a breach, I do want to know about it. I do want to snap into action very quickly. I mean, do what's right for the customer. That's the sales is all just a byproduct of doing the right thing.
That's right. And what about like if there's like a SolarWinds or Log4j? I mean, I'm sure you got inundated with calls, right after it was publicly announced.
And that's the primary reason that customers call, is just because they don't know. They just want to know a little bit more to be comfortable. They're uncomfortable. They're confused, or there's something that changed, and they want a level of comfort that we know what's going on. So when Log4j came out, or SolarWinds, we immediately released threat intel briefings and bulletins. We immediately put out all of our detections. I mean, detection engineers woke up, went into the office, started writing the detections. Once we got them deployed, we let all of our customers know. And customers that did have SolarWinds inside their environment, we got the IP addresses of those assets. We manually hunted all of those assets. We did find one a compromised customer, but it's all about providing a level of transparency that makes the customer understand that you are looking at their data, you are doing what's right for them, you are acting on their best interest.
And did you ever have to present in front of the executives, like you brought over as a kind of the expert, and also provide kind of the guidance in terms of what's happening? Did you ever have to do that?
I love doing that. I mean, executive briefings and board briefings is one of my favorite things, because not only do I get to educate them on the security industry as a whole and how important it is and the value that we're providing, but I also get feedback from them. When they start asking questions, I can kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit better, and we take that feedback back into our product team and say, hey, listen, I got these few questions from the board. We should probably surface this stuff right up front and really make this part of a board level presentation. So now if a customer calls and says, hey, I'm presenting to my board, and they're talking to their CSMs will offer to write the presentation for them. Send me your template. I'll go ahead and put some data in there, send it back, and we can collaborate on it. I'm happy to fly out to my customer site and talk to their executive teams. I mean, we're we're very pro education for the executive team, because ultimately they're the ones that are deciding that security is a directive for them. It is a priority for them. And we don't want to do something that makes security seem like just not fun to work with. We need to be easy to work with. We need to be easy to deploy. We need to be understanding of the business. That's the only way we're going to get adoption as security.
And security has become, I think in the past several years, it's becoming more of a board level discussion, which never used to be. And so it's super important to, and the executives are they're very, very ADD. Like, they see something in the news or whatever, they probably like reach out and say, okay, can it happen to us? But the odds are, they see the value, because again, it's if you see the statistics about what are the odds of a company going out of business after a breach, those numbers are horrendous. All front. The financial impact is tremendous. I feel like we can go on, but we're running out short of the time. But what's the easiest way, Randy, for people to reach out to you and get more information about Critical Start, and potentially just I don't know what the process of becoming a customer, if there's I'm assuming you don't necessarily do pilots, but you do have some discussions and so on. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, criticalstart.com is a great place to start. If you do have a value-added reseller that you work with, you can ask them about us and they can reach out. We do have different workshops that we'll do to really try to give the customer a day in the life of a Critical Start customer, because that's really what they're buying. They're buying the service, they're buying the experience, they're buying the outcomes. So when we walk them through things like our mobile app that allows them to do everything from their phone they can do from the web, they kind of understand like, oh, this is security made easy. And that's really what we're trying to push for. We want those outcomes without requiring all of their resources.
Is the mobile app addictive, where they have to look at it all the time?
So we actually had one of our CISOs tell us that he had to uninstall the mobile app because his SOC director was getting annoyed that the CISO was in there resolving alerts and isolating hosts. We also had a CISO tell us that because of the mobile app, he was able to start playing golf again, which I definitely appreciated that. So yeah, you can find us on all the socials. Follow us there. We do release some of our threat intelligence. We do put out some good thought leadership pieces, so we're publicly available.
Awesome, Randy. And listen, I've been following Critical Start for quite some time, and I tell you what, the growth, again, just by doing the right things by the customers, it's really amazing. So I can't wait to see where you go next.
I appreciate it, David. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much.